Hello and welcome to another episode of the DigiTeacher Digest. We've been looking at the work of Carl Mayton from Knowledge and Knows, and I've been looking at how that theory has informed my own practice and trying to unpack some of the ideas in computing education. And I want to do something really similar today, but to look at one of the big influences on Carl Mayton's work, which is the work of Basil Bernstein. Now, Bernstein is often considered very inaccessible, difficult to read. His vocabulary is not really intuitive. So there's a bit of a trigger warning there. But I want to try and just kind of take the basics of Bernstein's idea about classification and framing and look at pedagogical styles and what that might say to us about online learning and what happened during online learning during COVID. Bernstein's ideas have been very influential in the sociology of education. He was interested in why some social classes benefited from the schooling system and others didn't. And so he looked at the knowledge codes, the rules of the game, if you like, that are often not made explicit, that are implicit. And that lead to middle-class kids, for example, succeeding and working-class kids not succeeding at school. So there's a whole bunch of stuff in Bernstein, and it's quite inaccessible. And I'm by no means any expert, but what I want to take out of it is just the two ideas, and that is classification and of framing. So if we look at the ideas of classification and framing, you can see along the horizontal, we're looking at classification, and vertically we're looking at framing. So classification refers to the boundaries between academic subjects. Strong classification is where you have very strong boundaries. So you have a maths teacher who teaches maths, and the student is being taught to become a mathematician, to think like a mathematician, and so on. Weak classification is where those boundaries are breaking down. You have more cross-curricular work, and there are broader educational aims rather than training to become a this or that. Framing refers to the locus of control, or who has control basically over the learning process. So weak framing is when that control rests largely with the student. It's more self-directed learning. The sequencing, what you learn, what order you're learning it, how long you take to learn something is controlled more by the student than it is by the teacher. And strong framing is the opposite, where the teacher has control over the pacing, what's going to be learned at any stage, what activities are being conducted. Now, of course, schools themselves tend towards stronger framing rather than sort of self-directed learning from home, for example, which would tend naturally to be more student-centered. Now, I'm sure you'll recognize in this schema instantly many of the debates around education today, what schools should or shouldn't be doing, what teachers should or shouldn't be doing. For example, teachers are being exhorted all the time to become facilitators rather than teachers, to be the guide on the side rather than the sage on the stage. And in this rhetoric, the one side is valorized as being all that's good, and the other side is being demonized as all that is bad. And I don't think that's the case for 1 minute. So I'd like to use this schema just to explore some of those ideas by trying to look at what this means for pedagogical styles. I found this image on the internet, and I've had a hard time attributing it. I can find an image in ResearchGate, and I have that attributed in my blog, but offhand I can't remember where I got this from actually. And this describes different pedagogical styles in terms of classification and framing. And I find some of the terms a little bit curious. I'm not quite sure what to make of what is progressive pedagogy or emancipatory pedagogy, controlled or transmissive pedagogy. These are all terms that if you search separately, I can find references to them in different papers and things, but it's not a debate which is out there in teachers' ordinary discourse, and it's certainly not terms that I would normally find. So what I've taken the liberty of doing is taking this schema and translating it a bit. So I prefer these terms, that they seem a little bit more accessible to me. So looking at where classification is strong, where there's strong boundaries between subjects, where the control rests more with students, where it's more student-centered, it seems to me that that's where you get a lot of project-based learning. It's within a discipline. So, for example, they're doing a history project, or in geography, they're doing a geography project, etc. And they are largely learning through research and doing the project and whatever activities that the teacher is scaffolding on the side. Whereas where the framing is very strong, you can tend to get more direct instruction. The teacher has something to impart to a class, and they do that more or less directly. It's very much the traditional teaching style, I think. Where classification is weaker, in other words, the boundaries between subjects start breaking down, you obviously get much more cross-curricular work. So this could take the form of much more self-directed learning, where students describe their own learning paths, perhaps with more electives. They decide which electives they choose to do and so forth, perhaps with more online learning, where they can do particular courses at their own pace, etc., to construct, to put together a qualification of some sort. Where the framing is stronger, it's more teacher-centered, then you get very much a cross-curricular instruction, perhaps. So, for example, instead of having separate science or technology lessons, maths lessons, you might have STEM projects, but they are very much taught. So the teacher is controlling what activities are happening within that project, even though the projects themselves or the course, the lessons, might be cross-curricular. So in educational debate, you will find those who will argue stridently, for example, and say the evidence is in, direct instruction works, that's the best. And those who will say, no, problem-based or project-based, guide on the side type of pedagogical style, that works best. And you end up with two armed camps, each claiming that their view is the only one in town, and that I don't think that's the case at all. To my mind, what you need to do is think about different pedagogical styles as different moments in any course design. To my mind, effective pedagogy means moving around this plane. Even if you're wedded to ideas such as the value of problem-based or project-based learning, self-directed learning, you have to recognize, I think, that in order to effectively solve a problem, you do need some knowledge within particular disciplines. So you do have to strengthen the classification at times. Work that is totally student-centered, well, how effective is it going to be if they're not getting access to particular knowledge which the teacher has, which the teacher could easily pass on to them? So I'm a great believer in not having restricted diets of just direct instruction, direct instruction, direct instruction, or projects, projects, projects. I think you need to move around this plane as a teacher. There are times when you are giving students knowledge, and there are times when students should be off applying that knowledge. And I think this is true both for face-to-face and online learning. So what happened with COVID is COVID came along, a lot of schools then had to close, and where they could, obviously they went online. Now this was restricted obviously by either teachers or students not having proper internet access. Many schools went for an asynchronous model where you would get on when you could, or work would be posted and then you could finish it off in your own pace, etc. So that's weakening the framing. Many schools went by weakening the classification. So instead of having maths lessons and history lessons and so on, they would set projects, and then teachers would be on hand to support those. There was, I think, a perceived opportunity. So in much of the debate around this on social media that I saw, there were teachers arguing, we're going online, this is a perfect chance to move away from old-fashioned, bad, nasty direct instruction type of pedagogy towards more open-ended project-based. And this is going to be the moment that becomes a final move and we destroy the dragon forever. I wonder to what extent that happened. And I mean, this is a genuine question. I don't know to what extent it happened. I think there still needs to be a lot of research into what happened and how pedagogical styles did change, because they must have over COVID. In my own school, we kept strong framing and strong classification. So we followed a normal timetable. Most students were largely able to access internet. Most teachers were largely able to access internet from home. The school bent over backwards to get data to students who didn't have it, and the same for teachers. And so we kept a regular timetable. And if it was maths on a Monday first period, you would go online and have maths. Within departments, some departments changed their style quite a bit. So, for example, in maths, I know that different teachers took different grades instead of all teaching in the grade, which kind of lessened the prep and made for more coherent structure. I think a lot of teachers were setting projects and things online and then supporting via WhatsApp and so on. That was going on. But I'm not sure that it went on, how effectively it went on, and whether teachers actually believed in that project or not. Education, as Larry Cuban has pointed out, has been very resistant to technological change and very resistant to pedagogical change as well. And I think largely for good reason. Teachers do what's effective. And a mix of direct instruction and project work and the rest of it seems to be what's effective. So I think when teachers went online, they tried to do the same as much as possible. So, for example, what I did in my classes, I'm teaching IT, grade 8 and 9, so a mix of applications and of coding. And teaching coding online, I think, was quite difficult, because a lot of it depends on you intervening at an individual level with students, leaning over their shoulder, looking at their code and saying, have you run it? Have you tested it? Well, why do you think that's not working? Why do you think this isn't working? Oh, well done, this is working, that kind of thing. And that was very difficult to do online. So what I had is I kept a lot of the direct instruction, but I had it as videos. So I pre-recorded them. Just something I do in my classes anyway. I have that, whatever I do in class, I have a video of online so students can go back and review it. And so they could access that to do project work, which is largely what I do in class. I have that mix of direct instruction and project work. I think the project work was kind of slower paced because I wasn't able to give as much scaffolding online as I was face-to-face. So, generally speaking, if I'd managed to do 5 projects in a module previously, online I did, like 3.5. Things were slower, there needed to be time for catch-up and so on. But basically, my pedagogy didn't change that much by moving online. And I think that's a really interesting question. I think classification and framing is an interesting way of researching that. So if there's anyone out there who wants to research it, there's a framework you might consider using. I think behind all of this lies the whole question of the affordances of technology. Does technology afford one pedagogical style rather than another? And again, I think this is an open question. So much depends on what subject you're teaching, and it depends on what technology you're using. I had to teach English literature via WhatsApp, for example. Really interesting struggle that was. So, do the affordances of technology, does it afford one style over another? And if you look at a lot of the rhetoric around, for example, Apple Classrooms of Tomorrow from a couple of decades ago, it was very much that technology would herald a new constructivist pedagogy, which would replace the old-fashioned, whatever it was. And largely that hasn't happened. And I think largely it hasn't happened because the technology is a little bit agnostic in terms of the affordances it offers. I think technology affords purpose rather than content, if you like. So quite clearly you can do direct instruction online. You can make a video which delivers content, there's no problem there. Can you do the kind of interactive mentoring and close individual scaffolding that often happens during project work when a teacher is moving around a room and answering individual students' questions? I think that's slightly more difficult technologically to achieve, but it's not impossible. You can have separate conferences. I think the smaller the group, the more possible it is. It's certainly very difficult with a big class. So I would be very interested to hear if you've watched this video and you're a teacher and you had to go online during COVID or at any time or you've transitioned to online teaching, has it changed your pedagogical style? And if so, why do you think that is, or why do you think it didn't? Please drop that in the comments. I think this channel is dedicated to talking about education, and it's dedicated to professional development for teachers. So please like, share, and please comment. And hit that notification bell so that you never miss another episode again.